It's the long century. One episode, 1 year. So, 1903. A doctor trying to hear what the heart was saying. A scientist ringing a bell for a dog. Two mechanics dragging a flying machine across a sand dune.
A Western robbery that happened in New Jersey.
This is 1903. If your heart was behaving strangely, your doctor had one tool, his ear. He pressed it against your chest and listened, fast or slow, regular or irregular. That was about all he could know. What was actually happening inside the heart? Which chamber was failing? Which signal was lost? Which beat came too early, remained invisible? Wilhelm Einthoven wanted to change that. He was a professor of physiology at the University of Leiden. He knew that every heartbeat produced a tiny electrical pulse. The problem was not that the signal existed. The problem was that nobody could see it. So Einthoven built a machine. At its heart was a thread of quartz, thinner than a human hair, coated in silver, and stretched between powerful magnets. When electricity from a beating heart passed through the thread, it moved. Not much, just enough. Einthoven magnified that movement and traced it onto paper. For the first time, the heart left a visible signature, a wave. He labeled its peaks P, Q, R, S, and T. Those 5 letters are still used today. The machine itself was absurd. It weighed 270 kilograms. It required 5 people to operate. And the patient sat with one arm and one leg submerged in buckets of salt water. There was another problem. The machine was too large to fit inside the hospital. So Einthoven did something unexpected. He ran a telephone line from his laboratory to the hospital 1.5 kilometers away. The patient sat at one end, the machine recorded at the other. In 1924, Einthoven received the Nobel Prize. Today, ECGs are performed hundreds of millions of times every year. It began with a thread of quartz and 2 buckets of salt water. Ivan Pavlov was not interested in the mind. He was a physiologist studying digestion. To understand how dogs produced saliva, he developed a way to measure it precisely during feeding experiments. Then something unexpected happened. The dogs started salivating before the food arrived, not because of the food itself, but because they heard the footsteps of the assistant who usually brought it. Pavlov called this a psychic secretion, the body responding not to food, but to the signal that food was coming. He stopped studying digestion and started studying that. He paired a neutral sound, a metronome or a buzzer, with food. Sound, then food. Sound, then food. After enough repetitions, the sound alone was enough. The dog salivated, no food required. Pavlov called it a conditioned reflex. The animal had learned, not through thought or choice, but through repetition. In 1903, Pavlov presented this work in Madrid. A year later, he received the Nobel Prize for his work on digestion. But what the world remembered was something else. If a dog could be conditioned, what about a person? If behavior was just stimulus and response, observable, measurable, reproducible, then perhaps the mind was not as mysterious as everyone thought. Perhaps it was a machine that had learned the wrong lessons. In the summer of 1903, 2 groups of men were building machines. One had a wooden shed behind a house. The other had investors, a banker, and $28,000 in capital. In Milwaukee, William Harley and Arthur Davidson worked in a backyard workshop built by Davidson's father. They weren't launching a company, they were just trying to build a motorcycle. They built 3 that year, sold the first one to a friend named Henry Meyer. At almost the same time, 250 miles away in Detroit, Henry Ford and 12 investors signed the papers for a new company. It was Ford's 3rd attempt. The first 2 had failed badly enough that the investors refused to make him president. The factory was a former wagon shed on Mack Avenue. Ford didn't manufacture the parts himself. The engine, chassis, and transmission came from the Dodge brothers across town. 10 men assembled the cars, 15 a day. The first customer was a dentist from Chicago named Ernst Fenning. He paid $850. The car arrived a week later. Within 2 months, Ford had sold 215 cars. Harley and Davidson were still in the shed. One wanted scale, a car for every American. The other wanted something simpler, something they'd actually want to ride. One business was born in a meeting room, the other in a shed. One would put millions behind a steering wheel. The other would create something stranger, a machine people built part of their identity around. In 1903, both looked small. Only later would it become clear that they weren't competing to build vehicles. They were competing to define what mobility meant. By 1903, cinema had a problem. It didn't know how to tell a story. Most films were a single scene, from a single position, watched from a single point of view. Georges Méliès had pushed further. Rockets, sets, visual tricks. But it was still one scene at a time. Then came Edwin Porter. Porter worked for Edison's studio in New York. In November 1903, he took a crew to New Jersey, Essex County Park, and a stretch of the Lackawanna Railroad between Denville and Dover. The film was called The Great Train Robbery, a Western, shot entirely on the East Coast. The story was based on a real event, the 1900 robbery of a Union Pacific train in Wyoming by Butch Cassidy's gang. Budget, $150. Nobody in the cast received a screen credit. What Porter did was cut. The telegraph office, the train, the woods, the dance hall. One place, then another, then another. The audience followed without being told how. Nobody explained where the train was. Nobody explained that time had passed. The audience simply understood. That was new. Not the story, the grammar. The film also contained a scene audiences hadn't seen before. A bandit shoots a passenger at point-blank range. 12 minutes. That was enough. It was copied, pirated, and screened everywhere. Nickelodeon theaters opened across America to meet a demand that barely existed before. Then came the final shot. It had nothing to do with the plot. The outlaw, an actor named Justice Barnes, turns, looks straight at the audience, raises his revolver, and fires directly into the camera. The projectionist could place it at the beginning or the end. It didn't matter. The screen had stopped showing the world. It was aiming back. Panama did not become independent in the way countries usually do. No long war, no slow collapse of empire, no single defining battle. Instead, there was a room. The United States wanted a canal through Central America. Colombia controlled Panama and refused to cooperate. In a suite at the Waldorf-Astoria in New York, a French lobbyist named Philippe Bunau-Varilla met a Panamanian revolutionary, Manuel Amador. Money changed hands. $100,000 for a revolt. Not an army, not a nation, a payment. On November 3, 1903, the uprising began. The U.S. sent the warship Nashville. Colombian troops could not reach Panama. 3 days later, the U.S. recognized Panama as an independent republic. Almost no fighting. The most violent moment, a stray shell killed a Chinese worker in Panama City. 2 weeks later, a treaty was signed. The man who signed for Panama was not Panamanian. It was Bunau-Varilla, the French lobbyist from the Waldorf-Astoria. He had not been to Panama in 18 years. The Panamanian delegation was still traveling. A country represented by someone who arrived first. Not a revolution, a transaction completed faster than the people it represented could arrive.
On the morning of December 17, 1903, two brothers from Dayton, Ohio, launched a wooden aircraft off a beach in North Carolina. The first flight lasted 12 seconds. It covered 120 feet, shorter than the wingspan of a Boeing 747. 5 people were there to see it. Wilbur and Orville Wright ran a bicycle shop. They had no engineering degrees, no government funding, no institutional backing. They built the Wright Flyer in a workshop on West 3rd Street in Dayton, a building without electricity, where the machines ran on belts connected to a single gas engine. They chose Kitty Hawk because they had written to a weather station asking about wind conditions. Someone wrote back and said the winds were good. That day they flew 4 times. The longest flight lasted 59 seconds and covered 852 feet. Then a gust of wind caught the aircraft on the ground and flipped it. It never flew again. That evening, Orville Wright walked 4 miles to the nearest telegraph office. He sent a message to their father in Dayton. 12 words, 4 flights, longest 59 seconds, engine power alone, inform press. The telegraph operator misspelled his name. No one really reacted. A few newspapers mentioned it. Most did not. The bicycle shop still stands in Dayton. The airplane does not. That morning on the beach, a gust of wind, a broken plane, 12 seconds. That was all.